Guys, what's going on? Welcome to Cereal at Midnight. My name is Heath, and I am tremendously excited because I am joined by my friend, Chicago film critic, and founder of F This Movie, Patrick Bromley. Patrick, welcome.
Hi, Heath. Thank you.
So we go way back. We go back to like, I don't know, 10, 8 or 10. It's like a long time.
10 years, yeah. That you
Yeah.
started writing for F This Movie about 10 years ago.
Yep. And F This Movie is, first of all, everybody, the link is in the description of this video, but F This Movie is, you got to bookmark this thing, you got to go to it every single day. Movie love for movie lovers was the tagline, and it really is. You have built something pretty special over there. How would you describe F This Movie to people that might not know what it is?
I don't know. I've always described it as like, hey, we started a show and a website that was what I wanted to read and what I wanted to hear. So we try to talk about movies in a way that you would talk about with your friends. We try to be pretty positive. We're pretty irreverent. The name of the website makes it sound like we're kind of dumping on everything, but we're not actually. If I could go back in time and change the name of the website, I might, because it is a little bit misleading. It's actually a very affectionate and loving website where we talk about all the stuff that we love and that we're passionate about.
Yeah, and it really is like there's so much love for movies, and I wrote I think like 250 reviews and columns over there too. I did a series on 1976. I did a series on 1955. They're all there, guys. Go check them out. But for this conversation, it's the Halloween season. It's the scary movie month. We're going to talk about slashers. Slashers are something I think we both care a lot about. So I don't know, where do we jump in on slashers? Like, do you remember your first slasher memory?
I mean, I think it was probably seeing the original Nightmare on Elm Street at a friend's house because I wasn't allowed to see it, but he had described a bunch of scenes in it to me over lunch in the cafeteria in like, I don't know, first or second grade. And then I went to his house, a friend's house, for a sleepover, and we watched it. And I just didn't tell my parents, but I feel like that's where I really got bit by the slasher bug. It's my favorite subgenre of horror, which doesn't totally make sense because like I love monsters. Monsters were my gateway into movies, period. Like checking out books at the library about Universal monsters and King Kong and Godzilla, and like memorizing the names of all the actors who played these parts. That was my in for horror movies and movies in general. So I love monsters. I love practical effects. And yet slashers are like movie comfort food for me. Like they are the most welcoming thing I can think of, not just during the Halloween season. I mean, especially during the Halloween season, but like all year long. I could put on any slasher anytime and just sort of feel enveloped in it like a warm bloodbath.
You've talked in the past, or you've written. I think this has probably come up a lot, but you mentioned when you talk about slasher movies, you're like, specifically, I know you've said this in relation to the Friday the 13th movies, that you're like visiting friends, like the counselors and they feel like friends, and that's a very good observation because they feel like real people.
Well, and I like to watch my friends die. I like to see them just brutally murdered
Mhm.
time after time.
All right, well, guys, that was Cereal at Midnight. We want to thank. No, just kidding. No, but you're right. Like, there's something about slashers that's just so. Because I'm the same. I grew up. I grew up in a super religious household, as you know, and like there was so much that was like off the table until I was like 20. But the slashers were always calling me, and I don't know, like Freddy and Jason and Chucky. I mean, I'm not gonna go through all of them, but there is something that it is weirdly comforting. I don't even know why that is, but is it because it's like see, this is where I get analytical and I start like, well, but I don't know that that's productive or not. But I don't know, like maybe it's that primal thing where it's like it's as simple as you're being chased, you're being hunted. This is it. It is survival. Backstory's not important. I would even go as far as to say backstory does a disservice to some of this stuff. What do you think?
I mean, I like a little bit of backstory. I think it's fun when you get to know the characters a little bit. That's why, the slashers that I tend to like have a little bit of setup at the beginning where we get to know the people. And a lot of times, you know, slashers tend to invoke a sense of fun. If a slasher is real dark or mean spirited, I tend to reject it. I like the ones that are more about a sense of fun. So the Friday the 13th are definitely like that. The Nightmare on Elm Streets, where you're hanging out with this group of young people, having a good time, you know, drinking, partying, sleeping around, whatever. And then once the kills start, again, there's something, I don't know, because it's so far removed from, like, the one subgenre of horror that I can't watch, that I won't watch, is home invasion, because it's like, oh, that's way too real. Whereas a slasher is so far removed from like what I believe is possible, that there's something that is very easily digestible for me. And it's very, it's safe. It's entertaining because it's safe, because it's so outside the realm of possibility in my life, you know, hopefully, knock on wood. So I think that's a big part of what I like about it. In terms of like backstory, for the killer, like, I don't need any backstory. Yeah, like I really don't.
Did we need to know Freddy's childhood? Did we need to
know? No, not at all. I mean, think of the original Halloween. Like, you know, as we get about all the backstory we're going to get in those first few minutes, and then the rest is just sort of off and running. There's a slasher that I watch regularly. It's not good. It's called Final Exam. Are you familiar with Final Exam? The slasher is just like a dude in a jacket, and there's no backstory, and there's no hook, there's no gimmick. It's just like this dude walking around to school killing people. And that is one of the most comforting slashers for me. I don't know why.
What about Night School? What do you think about?
Love Night School.
Great, right?
Yeah, super good. I didn't see that until the Warner Archive Blu-ray came.
Me either. No, same for me. What are some examples of, you mentioned mean-spirited, or like what kind of, can you name a couple?
I don't know if people would call it a slasher, but I think about something like High Tension. Oh, yeah. Which is a very well-made movie. I'm not here to bag on High Tension. It's just not what I go to horror movies for. Mm-hmm. There's another one. Again, a lot of people love this movie. Came out a couple years ago, called Terrifier, with Art the Clown. And he's become an icon. Like, something about that movie has captured the imagination of a lot of horror fans. I found it really off-putting because the gore was so brutal and the kills were so gnarly and mean-spirited that I was like, oh, this isn't why I watch horror movies. Yeah. So stuff like that I can just live without, and I'll stick with my safe little Final Exams, you know.
That's something that's interesting, though, and I think about this a lot, and I've been talking about it. I talked about it recently in something, but I don't remember what. It was a Horror Pack unboxing, the subscription service Horror Pack. When a horror movie is, if it takes itself too seriously, I feel like that becomes a barrier, because you put a lot on the premise, and if the premise does not suck the viewer in, you know, it's just inviting us to either watch it ironically or to you. I feel like when you say, let's have fun, like have fun with this movie, instead of trying to be like, this is going to bash your brains out, that rarely works for me. I always gravitate more towards the fun house. I mean, we've got the fun house poster. I gravitate to the fun stuff that's like, you know, we can get crazy. This can get like really messed up, but we're always having fun. It's like that ride. I wonder if that's maybe my age, though, just the kind of stuff that we came out of, like the stuff that we were raised with. I don't know.
Maybe. Like, what do you think about, because there's a trend in all horror across the board now for nostalgia, right? Because we are either the audience for these movies, or people of our generation are now making these movies. And so there's a trend towards let's make stuff that feels like the 80s movies that we grew up on. And sometimes it's cool, like if it's just like, okay, there's the John Carpenter font, okay, there's like a synthesizer score, like I can deal with some of that stuff, and sometimes it's cool. Sometimes it goes so far there's a movie, I feel bad mentioning it by name, but I'm going to do it. It came out a couple of years ago. It's called Lost After Dark. And Lost After Dark's whole thing is, what if we made a really faithful, generic 80s slasher movie? And it's like, for some reason, I love a generic 80s slasher, but I don't like a fake generic 80s slasher. I'm like, why would I watch you Lost After Dark when I can just watch Graduation Day? So I don't know how you feel about this trend towards nostalgia.
Well, it's tricky because I don't want to be the old man who's like, get off my lawn or yelling at clouds, but it does happen, right? And because I think we have, decades, we have decades of fandom in our past now. And I'm like, well, this was, I don't know, I feel like it's a diminished returns. And I'm with you. Like, sometimes it does feel, sometimes it works. Did you see The Barn?
Yeah.
I liked The Barn. I thought that was a good throwback style. I mean, it doesn't have, I don't know if that's a good example of what we're talking about, but I know what you're talking about, the synthesizer score. I tend to be really grumpy about that stuff in a way that I don't always reveal on YouTube, but I mean, I'll reveal it with you because it's like, it's like I come into those almost with a chip on my shoulder and I'm just like, well, no, this already exists. You've reinvented something that didn't need to be reinvented. And if you're not bringing a unique, an authorial twist, if you haven't, that's what the Hatchet movies did so well, because they kind of, in my opinion, they were like, well, here's something that's new. It's very old school, but it's also a new twist on something that we already love, with great practical effects and a cool, lore. They gave us, they didn't give us like the when he was 8 years old. They didn't do all that. It was just enough. But it does seem like nostalgia is this all-consuming thing now, and there is no escaping it. Because have you observed the trend that it doesn't matter how good or bad something is, in 5 to 10 years, everybody seems to like it?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm amazed at some of the movies that have been now reappraised and reassessed as classics, and I'm just like, really?
It's better than you remember. Yeah. And you made an observation. You might not remember this either. And if you want me to cut this out, I'll cut this out. But you made an observation years ago. It was a podcast with Heather Wixon. And you guys were talking about how Scream Factory had become this stamp of approval for anything. They could put out any piece of crap, and if they put the Scream Factory logo on it, it was going to sell. Maybe sell out or whatever. And that has only got, that was seriously like 8 years ago or something, but that has only continued to get more and more, that trend is stronger than it's ever been. Like, all kinds of stuff. I'm like, well, it's Scream Factory, so I gotta have it.
Well, I think it's true of all the boutique Blu-ray labels, because we're living in the best of all possible times, right? When like Arrow Video is going to put out Phantom of the Mall, and we're like, what world did we ever expect we were going to get some special edition, high def, classy release of Phantom of the Mall? But it also suggests that like Phantom of the Mall is worthy of that treatment. And maybe that's not the case. It is for somebody. And that's the thing. Like, for somebody, that's their favorite movie, and they're so excited to have that on their shelf. For a lot of us, it's like, well, I guess it's pretty good, right? If Arrow's doing that. Vinegar Syndrome is so great at putting out movies I've never heard of, but they automatically become like worthy by virtue of the fact that Vinegar Syndrome is putting them out. And like, at least for me, I've seen some stuff. I've blind bought some stuff from Vinegar Syndrome because it's like, this is the only way I can see it. This is some crazy movie I've never heard of, and the only way to see it is to buy it from them. And I'll watch it and I'll be like, oh, I don't know if I'm ever gonna watch this again. I blind bought this and maybe it wasn't worth it, but I kind of got sucked into this idea that like, well, if they're putting it out, it's got to be great, right? Now the flip side is, every once in a while there's a gem that makes 5 of those mistakes worth it. You know, like last year I bought a movie called Blood Games. Have you seen Blood Games? About the female softball team like being chased on their bus. It's amazing. It's a great horror movie. And it makes all the like weird puppet porn and stuff that I bought from Vinegar Syndrome worth it, you know?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Hey, have you seen Death Screams? You're speaking about Arrow. They just put out this movie called Death Screams from 1982. It's a regional, this is Arrow Video. Just put a regional North Carolina slasher. It was an early slasher. And they gave it it's a 35 millimeter. They gave it a scan. It's got a new 30-minute bonus behind the scenes. You know, they talk to everybody that's basically still alive. It's like, well, that's great. Now, Arrow may have a better track record than some. You know what? I shouldn't even go down that road. But yeah, no, you're right. Like we are living in the best of times. Why do you think? See, I kind of wonder if this is the fire sale before everything. It's like, here, you guys, let's get it out while we can, while the market is still.
Yeah, I think so. That the writing is on the wall. That physical media is kind of dying, and the only avenue left for physical media is collectors like you and me, and these kind of cult labels, you know, like Universal and Paramount. And they're not. I mean, they're still doing releases, and Paramount now has their whatever Paramount Classics line or whatever. So that's great. I like seeing that stuff come out, but I really do think that most of the movies that we're getting excited about come from these smaller boutique labels now. And I think that's kind of the future of physical media for as long as it will withstand it. Because I do think you're absolutely right. I think it's like, this is all going away. So let's capitalize on it while we can.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's ever going to I actually don't think that it's ever going to completely go away, but there are less of us than there's ever been. You know, we were around in the VHS era, and that was like, everybody wasn't going, like, not everybody had a huge VHS library, right? Like, you had some, but then there were people like us who were like, oh, I need to have, just try to pull an obscure 90s movie from memory, and I can't do it. My improv skills have failed. But, you know, like, I'll do like, so I needed to have the Ewok movies on VHS before they existed on anything else. I'm like, I have to have that because I want to watch that. The market got so big, but I think it's really contracting back to what it was before that DVD boom, when it's just for the enthusiasts, like the Laserdisc collectors. I mean, that was a sign of, you know, a real cinephile or a real enthusiast. And I think that's where we're headed back to. But I don't know. Will there be a market for Death Screams on Blu-ray in 10 years? I don't know. But
you talking about it, you know, I'm like, what, a regional early slasher? Like, these are buzzwords that I key into immediately, and I'm like, I want to see that. So now do I have to buy the Arrow Blu-ray? You know, there's no other way for me to see Death Screams. So part of me is like, I want to log on to Amazon and order it right now, because I am such a sucker for slashers. I'm such a sucker for regional horror. And I am a collector. So these, you know, my wife is very, very smart, and she is constantly saying, like, boy, these companies really have your guy's number. And it's like, oh boy, do they. They know exactly what they're doing, and all of the limited runs and stuff. So it's like, well, I gotta buy it. They're only making 3,000, and what if I'm not one of the people that gets it? You know, I don't want to have to buy it on eBay after it's sold out or something like that. We're so far from talking about slashers right now.
Yeah, that's okay. This is good stuff. This is stuff that people will really be able to relate to.
Yeah.
How about your journey with Giallo? Do you still consider yourself a Giallo fan?
Yeah, I think so. I've gotten a little burned out lately on what is and what isn't Giallo, because Twitter, you know, is constantly having that debate.
Yeah.
But I'm still definitely like seeking them out, and I'm not as well versed in them as I am in slashers, and they run together for me more than slashers do. Like, slashers I could totally tell apart. A lot of the Giallo movies I've seen, including those great Vinegar Syndrome boxes, they've released 3 of those collections of forgotten Gialli. and some of them are really cool, but like I couldn't tell you the titles or like what happens in like, oh, that one, yeah, I think I've seen it, but I can't tell it apart from Police Are Blundering in the Dark. But I'm still a fan. I still like seeing, you know, where sort of the slasher roots come from. I'm still a sucker for any kind of Italian horror. Just, I love the dubbing. I love the aesthetics of it all. I just am crazy for that stuff. So I'm still a fan, but I'm not as educated on that subgenre as I am on something like slashers.
Yeah, you went right where I wanted
Where are
you
you
to
at
go.
on Giallo?
Oh, I don't know a whole lot about it. I mean, I've seen a few, but I knew that you had gone through this kind of a crash course where you hated them, and then you're like, I feel like I need to learn more about them, and then it was like Stockholm syndrome or something. You're just like, oh, I love it, it's great. So I wanted to take your temperature on it now and see like where that was now.
Oh, I'm still like I was going to these 24-hour horror marathons early in the days of F this movie, and at like 3 a.m. they would show Lucio Fulci movies. And at 3 a.m., I just had no patience for them. I just was like, what is this? This makes no sense. They're gory for the sake of being gory. And now I'm at the point where Fulci's one of my absolute favorite directors. Like, I've come so far on Fulci.
Okay, I want to talk about that because Fulci is super mean spirited in a lot of his stuff. So, can you just tell a little bit about how you got there and maybe what that was like?
Fulci for me is mean spirited in a way that I almost find amusing. He's not doing this edgelord thing where he's like, can you believe how nasty I am? This is the darkness of the human soul. He's just like, I don't know, what if this happened? What if the guy made duck noises? And I'm like, yeah, of course. What if the guy, his most mean-spirited movie, The New York Ripper, is the movie that turned me around on him. Like, I watched The New York Ripper and I was like, oh, wait, this is terrific. And it is, I would never tell anyone to watch The New York Ripper, you know, like it is a really ugly movie. But if you're a Fulci fan, you can sort of appreciate the dark comedy of it all.
Have you seen those new 4Ks from Blue Underground?
I'm still not 4K. I don't have a 4K TV or player.
They are revelatory, especially New York Ripper and House by the Cemetery. Is just like, whoa. I mean, they look like really good film prints.
Wow.
Yeah.
Shoot. Yeah, that was when I saw that they started putting those out. That was like, oh, maybe it's time to upgrade. You know, like yeah. I'm always looking for a reason, but I almost don't want to upgrade because I don't want to get into buying 4K. Like, I don't want to replace Blu-rays that I already have with 4K.
Well, that's the challenge too, because we are, you know, being the enthusiasts that we are, we've bought these movies so many times, and then there's the whole, like, where do we draw the line? And then every time I talk about 4K, somebody is like, well, you know, 8K is coming too. And I'm like, is it? I don't know if it is, but, you know, Scream Factory just put out those Halloween 4Ks, and I'm like, how many times have we bought Halloween on any sort of a disc format? I mean, VHS, like, at least 6 times for me, at least.
Full Anchor Bay DVDs, yeah, and then Blu-rays, and then the box set, and now the 4K. And honestly, you know, I love Halloween 4 so much that I'm like, that's one of those ones that I'm like so tempted, you know, because like, what does Halloween 4 look like in 4K? But I haven't taken the plunge yet.
Speaking of Halloween, getting it back to slashers, do you want to? This ties into the backstory thing too. What do you like? You want to talk briefly about the Rob Zombie approach to Halloween? Do you think that works? Do you think? See, I know you've wrestled with this too, but I'm curious where you're at with it now.
The thing is, you're kind of either a Rob Zombie fan or you're not. And if you're not, there's nothing in his Halloween that's going to convince you to be into him. I am a Rob Zombie fan, so I find the first half of his Halloween at least interesting. I don't know how good it is, because the thing is, it doesn't need to be a remake of Halloween, the first half of that movie. It could be the birth of any killer, you know, it's Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer at a young age. So I don't mind all the backstory and stuff. I get people saying, what makes Michael Myers scary is that you don't know anything about him. And so they reject his approach to like, here's where evil begins. It doesn't totally bother me. I'm not super precious about Michael Myers, but the second half of that movie where he's just remaking Halloween is way less interesting to me because it's so similar to what Carpenter already did. I vastly prefer Halloween 2, his Halloween 2. Which I think is very much his own movie, which I think is really infused with like this idea of like, well, what would happen to the people who were affected by something like this? How would they respond? And everybody kind of responds in different ways. And it's really this look at trauma and PTSD. And again, he uses the F word a lot and he uses 70s music and a lot of the same actors. So people have legitimate gripes. I can't talk them out of it, but I think Halloween 2 is a pretty brilliant horror film. So much so that when Halloween 2018 came out, I saw people praising it like crazy for all these things that I was like, but Rob Zombie did that in 2009. How come we crapped all over his movie and now we're praising this new one for doing the exact same thing, at least as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. The way you talked about that, I just want to point out to the viewer, like that's what drew me to this movie, because you speak with passion about things. You have the analytical mind. You are a film critic, and you bring that film critic. Film critics are not the enemy, or they don't have to be. Some of them actually are, but they don't have to be. The way you talk about this, the way you love the movies, and the way that you can break them down into why they work or why they don't work, that was fascinating to me, and that's why everybody needs to go check out This Movie. Subscribe to the podcast, and you get this on a weekly basis and content every single day, which is, amazing. I think you take Sunday off, right? This is the only day you don't post something on the
Sunday. I mean, we do like an open thread on the weekends where people chime in with like what they've been watching and stuff. But yeah, we don't post content on the weekends.
Is there anything else that you want to cover before we sign off for this episode?
No, I just want to thank you for being my friend for 10 years. And it's been a pleasure seeing how much success you've had on your own. It was always so great to have you as part of the This Movie family, and you'll always be part of the family. But to see you, if we were the Beatles, this is Wings, and Wings has grown even bigger than the Beatles.
No, that's not true. But well, thank you. I appreciate what you're saying. We are family. We are family forever, and the feeling is exactly. It's mutual for me too. Tell people where. Just plug.
fthismovie.com every day, at fthismovie on Twitter, and I'm just at Patrick Bromley.
And there's a new series that's starting on the This Movie YouTube channel. We should talk about that.
Yeah, we're venturing out into video a little bit. We experimented with it a couple of years ago. Myself and my friend Doug did a series of videos that stopped when he moved out to Los Angeles. But we have had a regular column with two of our writers, Adam and Rob, for a couple of years now, called Reserved Seating, and it is just now being spun off into its own weekly video series. So viewers of your channel may get a kick out of that.
Yeah, they absolutely will. Go check it out. I'll put a link to that channel in the description of this video. Everything you need to know is in the description of this video. Just click through and check it all out. Patrick Bromley, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about slashers and more.
Slashers and more. Yeah, thank you.
This has been a blast. So guys, thank you for watching, and continue the conversation in the comments below. So signing off for Cereal at Midnight and Patrick Bromley. We will catch you later.